Welcome back, everybody. Today we're tackling a pretty unique challenge, and I'm excited to dive in. We're going to be looking at how information can get distorted, especially when it comes to hypnosis. And get this, our main source is a Polish YouTube video. So right off the bat, there's that extra layer of potential for things to, get lost in translation, which should be fun.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Having that translation step definitely adds another layer to think about in terms of how the information is filtered, how it's interpreted, all that.
Right. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays into the content itself. We're going to be focusing on a video by Collegillo Grafassi, who seems to be a bit of a hypnosis guru. By the end of this deep dive, the goal is for all of us to have a sharper, more critical lens for evaluating the information we come across, whether it's from, a friend, a news article, or even, like we said, a hypnotic session.
Definitely. Sounds like a good plan to me.
So Grafassi starts his video with this actually pretty clever game. It's kind of like a hypnotic twist on that classic game of telephone. Do you know the one? Where you whisper a message down the line?
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. And it never ends the way it started. Ever.
Exactly. That's the whole point. And by the end, the message is completely different, like totally garbled. For example, he gives the first person the phrase, take a shower, go to sleep.
Oh, wow.
And it somehow transforms into flying, hugging something with my head. It's hilarious, but it also makes you think, couldn't you use this argument to discredit any information? Not just from hypnosis. I mean, how do we know the distortion isn't really just reality itself?
That's a really interesting point. It's true. Information is always being filtered and reshaped as it travels. But I think what makes this game such a powerful illustration is that it highlights how vulnerable information is to unintentional distortion, especially when you're dealing with something as subjective as the human mind.
That's true. It's just the nature of subjectivity. So then how does all of this connect to hypnosis specifically?
Well, Grafassi argues that information from hypnosis is particularly susceptible to this type of contamination. He says there are a few different things that can distort the information that comes out, like the influence of past lives or other dimensions.
Well, past lives and other dimensions, that sounds a little out there, even for hypnosis.
I know, right? It does sound a bit wild. But think about it this way. If past lives exist and they're somehow stored in our subconscious, couldn't that influence what comes out under hypnosis?
I see what you mean. So it's not necessarily that he's saying these things definitely exist, but he's acknowledging them as possible factors in how information is filtered through the hypnotic state.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And it gets even more complex when you bring in a person's own mental framework. We all have our own beliefs, experiences, biases, all of that, and that can unconsciously color how we perceive and interpret information, even under hypnosis.
Can you give me an example? Like, how would that work?
Sure. So imagine someone who really, truly believes in alien abductions, right? And they're undergoing hypnosis to explore a past life experience. Their beliefs about extraterrestrials might influence how they remember things, leading them to interpret like certain sensations or images as evidence of alien contact, even if that's not objectively accurate.
I see. So their own mental framework is almost acting like a filter, shaping the information they're accessing.
Exactly. And that leads to a really important question that Grafassi asks. If information from hypnosis is potentially so unreliable, why even bother with it at all? If it's just a jumble of, distorted memories and subjective interpretations, what's the point?
That's a good question. How does he answer that?
Well, he goes on to describe two main types of hypnosis sessions, personal and investigative. With personal sessions, it's all about helping a client with a specific problem they have, like maybe anxiety or a phobia. And in these cases, he argues that the accuracy of the information isn't as crucial. What matters is understanding the root of the problem.
So it's more about finding the source of the issue, even if the path there is a little winding. But how does this idea of finding the source apply to investigative hypnosis, when the whole point is to uncover information about a specific topic, like those Mayan civilization investigations we mentioned earlier? How do you get reliable information from that kind of session?
That's where it gets really interesting. Investigative sessions aim to explore specific things, phenomena. And Grafassi acknowledges that these are much trickier when it comes to getting reliable information. He says it's like panning for gold.
Panning for gold. Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk me through that.
Imagine you're standing in a river, right, sifting through all the sand and gravel. Most of what you're looking at is useless, but then hidden in all that are those precious nuggets of gold. That gold, that's the essential truth you're looking for in investigative hypnosis. But to find it, you got to sift through a lot of distortion, all that sand and gravel. It's a process of filtering and discernment.
So how do you know which nuggets are real gold? How do you separate the good stuff from the junk?
Well, that's where Grafasi's research approach comes in. He and his team have a very structured process for this kind of hypnosis, specifically to deal with that challenge. They choose a research topic every week and develop protocols, which basically means sets of standardized questions.
Oh, so they're trying to control for individual biases and interpretations by keeping things consistent across the board.
Yeah, exactly. And then those protocols are translated into different languages so that teams from different cultures can conduct sessions using the same questions. It makes their research approach truly global and comparative. And they've investigated some really interesting topics this way, from ancient civilizations to, well, mysteries of the universe.
Wait, did you say they've done hypnosis sessions on black holes? That seems, ambitious.
It does, right. But
Huh.
that's what makes their work so fascinating. They're not afraid to push boundaries, and they're incredibly thorough. They record all of their sessions and upload them to their Investigations YouTube channel. You can actually watch them. It's all there for anyone to study and review.
So anyone can see how they're getting this information? That's wild. But, okay, it seems like a big piece is still missing here. They're collecting all this data, but how do they actually validate the information? How do they decide what's reliable?
That's a great question, and we're going to dive into that right after a quick break. Stay with us. So before the break, we were talking about Grafasi's approach to investigative hypnosis, how he and his team are gathering data from sessions all over the world.
It's a pretty massive project, exploring all these mind-blowing topics and documenting everything so carefully.
It really is. And that brings us back to the question you asked. How do they actually validate the information? How do they know what's real and what's not? How do they separate the truth from the, well, the potential for distortion that comes with hypnosis?
Exactly. It feels like we're right on the verge of a big reveal here.
Well, get ready to have your mind blown because their validation method is so simple, but it's also incredibly profound. It all comes down to repetition.
Repetition. So, like, if something comes up over and over in different sessions, that makes it more likely to be true.
Exactly. But it's not just about how often it comes up. It's about the consistency across different contexts. Remember all those multilingual, cross-cultural teams we talked about? That's a huge part of it. If a certain detail or a concept keeps popping up in sessions all over the world, even with people speaking different languages, that suggests it might be onto something real.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that connects to the whole nuggets of gold idea. Each repetition is like another layer of validation. It refines the information until those core insights really start to shine through. I have to admit, though, I'm a little skeptical. Couldn't people just be repeating things they've heard before? Even under hypnosis, how do they know it's not just cultural contamination or, just plain old imagination?
That's a valid point. And Grafasi actually addresses that directly. He says it's not just about word-for-word repetition, it's more about identifying consistent patterns and themes. Think about it. If you have a dozen people from different backgrounds, all speaking different languages, and they all describe a similar experience under hypnosis, well, it becomes a lot harder to dismiss that as just coincidence.
Right, there's got to be something more to it. It's like a subconscious pattern recognition system. The more a detail or theme repeats across different people and contexts, the more likely it is to be, well, closer to the truth. But, okay, even with all that, isn't there a risk that people might be more inclined to believe something just because it comes from hypnosis? Because there's that whole mystique around it, you know what I mean?
You've hit on a really important point. Grafasi actually talks about how he's noticed a worrying trend of people just blindly accepting information presented through hypnosis, especially online. It's almost like those hypnotic suggestions can bypass our critical thinking. It makes us more likely to accept information without really questioning it.
That makes sense. There's just something about hypnosis that seems mysterious, powerful, so people are more likely to believe what they hear.
Right. And Grafasi felt like he needed to address that.
Yeah.
He realized that people needed more guidance on how to critically evaluate this kind of information. He didn't want them to just blindly accept everything they came across.
So it's about empowering people to be more discerning, to really think critically about information, especially when it comes to something like hypnosis, which honestly makes perfect sense considering how much information is out there these days, especially online. It feels like we're just constantly bombarded with different narratives, different opinions, all competing for our attention.
Exactly. It's become more important than ever to develop those critical thinking skills, to be able to sort through all the noise and figure out what's credible. And that's where Grafosi's work really stands out. He's not just trying to uncover hidden truths, he's also trying to give people the tools to be more aware, more discerning about the information they consume.
So how does this all connect back to his research? How does he actually put this into practice? How's he trying to promote this critical thinking approach?
Well, a couple of years ago, he and his team started a whole department focused on this. Investigative Hypnosis. It's a global effort with different sections specializing in different languages and cultures. It's all about exploring a huge range of topics, but with the focus on doing it rigorously and transparently.
That's amazing, like a global network of hypnotic explorers. So how do they actually conduct these investigations? What's their process like?
They have a really structured system. Each week, they pick a new research topic and carefully develop a set of questions specifically for that topic. And those questions are translated into multiple languages, which ensures consistency across all the different teams.
So they're using the same questions and procedures for all their investigations, no matter the language or culture, to minimize bias, I guess, and to make sure the results are comparable.
Exactly. It's super thorough. And they don't just do these sessions in isolation. They record everything, documenting the process, the questions, the responses, and then they upload those recordings to their investigations YouTube channel so anyone can see how the information is being gathered.
Wow. That's a huge commitment to transparency. They're not just giving people the conclusions, they're showing the whole process.
Right. They want people to be able to see how they're doing it, to understand the subtleties of hypnosis,
Right.
and to engage with the data themselves. It's a really different approach compared to how hypnosis has traditionally been done. It's often been very secretive, but they're inviting everyone to be part of the process.
It's like they're saying, don't just believe us, look at the evidence for yourself. Engage with it and form your own conclusions.
Exactly. It's about giving people the power to be active participants in the search for truth, not just passive receivers of information.
This is all so thought-provoking. It's amazing to see how they're approaching this. But okay, what does all this mean for us? For everyday people, we're not all hypnotists. How can we actually use these insights in our own lives?
That's the big question, isn't it? How do we take these ideas about information distortion and critical thinking and actually apply them to our own experiences? It's so easy to get overwhelmed by all the information out there, especially online.
I know what you mean. It's like we're constantly bombarded with news stories, social media posts, all kinds of stuff. It's hard to know what to believe.
It really is. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from Grafosi's work is that we all need to cultivate a healthy sense of skepticism towards all information, no matter where it comes from. Now, that doesn't mean being cynical, but rather approaching things with a curious and discerning mind.
So it's not about rejecting everything, but more about taking a moment to consider the source, the potential biases, and the evidence before you form an opinion.
Precisely. Ask yourself, who is presenting this information? What are their motivations? What kind of evidence are they giving me? And maybe the most important question, does this align with what I already know? Or does it challenge my existing beliefs?
It's like we all need to become information detectives, carefully analyzing the evidence, looking for clues, piecing together a real picture of what's going on. And just like Grafasi and his team use that cross-cultural repetition to validate information, we can apply those same principles in our own lives.
Exactly. Look for patterns, look for different viewpoints, and be cautious of anything that comes from only one source. And remember, the most attention-grabbing stories, the ones that really pull you in, those aren't always the most accurate. Sometimes the most valuable insights are the ones that are a little quieter, a little less flashy.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for navigating this crazy world of information.
Me too. And I think the key takeaway is this. We all have a responsibility to be critical thinkers, to question our assumptions, to be open to different viewpoints, and to never stop learning. It's a process, a journey of discovery.
Well said. So next time you see that captivating headline or that viral post, take a deep breath, pause, consider the source, look for more evidence, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
And remember, the search for truth, it never really ends. It's an adventure with lots of twists and turns and unexpected discoveries, so stay curious and keep digging.
It's been quite a journey today, exploring the world of hypnosis with Kalora Grafasi and his team. It's fascinating to see how they're making this field more transparent and rigorous and, accessible to everyone.
It really has been insightful. Grafasi's dedication to openness and his emphasis on critical thinking are really refreshing, especially in a field that's often been so mysterious.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to this idea of using repetition to validate information. The more something comes up across different people and cultures, the more likely it is to point towards a deeper truth. But I keep coming back to this. How do we apply this in our own lives? I mean, we're not all hypnotists.
That's the big question, right? How do we take these ideas about information distortion, critical thinking, all that, and actually use them in our daily lives? It's easy to get overwhelmed by just how much information is out there, especially online.
Seriously, it feels like we're constantly drowning in news stories, social media, opinions. It's hard to know what to believe.
I totally agree. And I think one of the most valuable takeaways from Grafasi's work is this. We need to be skeptical towards all information, no matter where it's coming from. Not cynical exactly, but approaching things with a curious and discerning mind.
So, not rejecting everything outright, but pausing to consider the source, any potential biases, the evidence, before you form an opinion.
Exactly. Ask yourself, who's giving me this information? What are their motivations? What evidence are they providing? And maybe most importantly, ask yourself, does this fit with what I already know? Or is it challenging my beliefs?
It's like we have to become information detectives. We need to be analyzing the evidence, looking for anything that doesn't add up. And just like Rafasi and his team are using that cross-cultural repetition to validate information, we can kind of apply those same ideas in our lives.
Exactly. Look for patterns. Seek out different perspectives. Be wary of information that's only coming from one source. And don't forget, the most captivating, the most persuasive stories, those aren't always the most accurate. Sometimes the most valuable insights are the ones that are a little quieter, a little less attention-grabbing.
I feel like this conversation has been so eye-opening. I have a whole new way of looking at this, a new way of navigating this information overload we're all facing.
Me too. And the key takeaway, I think, is that we all have a responsibility to be critical thinkers, to question our assumptions, to be open to other points of view, and of course, to never stop learning. It's an ongoing process.
Very well said. So, to wrap up, the next time you come across that headline that just pulls you in, or you see that viral post everyone's talking about, remember what we've talked about today. Take a breath. Pause. Consider the source. Look for more evidence, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Absolutely. The search for truth never really ends. It's an adventure. So embrace the challenge, stay curious, and keep on digging.